Hi everyone. So I did my witness to suffering paper on a patient that I had during my work at Tufts. So what I saw was I was not working on my floor, and then around 2:30 I got called down to a mental health floor to sit for a patient that was suicidal. So I grabbed my belongings, I went downstairs, and usually I was expecting just like a patient that's either restrained or like calm. It's usually something similar to that, especially like in an overnight shift. So I wasn't really expecting anything like crazy. So I walked downstairs and I walked into the room as like the security guard was walking out, and I noticed that there was like 8 or 9 people standing around my patient. And so I was like, okay, this is interesting. So I kind of just like waited, stood in the corner because I was just sitting for this patient. I didn't have to help with like assessments or anything. So one of the nurses moved out of the way, and I saw that his wrists were completely covered in bandages and just like saturated in blood, like completely soaked in blood, both his wrists. And I was just like thrown away in shock because I we always hear about these kind of things, but we never I've never really like seen anything so like traumatic, so sudden without any warning. So I was a little thrown off by that, and so I just kind of like kept it together and just like observed what was happening. And so then one of the nurses brought me outside, and she gave me a little bit report about this patient. She notified me that he had tried to overdose on his antidepressants and that he cut both of his wrists with a bread knife. And this was about 3 hours ago. So it took about 9 people to get him into the emergency department, and I guess he was really agitated and uncooperative there. Um, and they couldn't give him Narcan because it didn't work with the type of medication that he was on. So they gave him Benadryl to try to calm him down. Um, and so at this point, he was unconscious. He was just laying there with completely saturated wrists, and he wasn't restrained yet. Um, so he eventually, I just ended up sitting with the patient once everybody left. His respiratory rate was 5. He came in with a respiratory rate of 8, so he was kind of declining a little bit, and they were debating intubating him, but then they decided not to, just to see how he's going to do with his ABG. So they drew ABGs, and he ended up being fine. So they just were kind of waiting it out. So they kept reassessing him every half an hour ish, and so the only thing that could get him to wake up was a sternal rub. So um, that was kind of like something I'd also never seen before, was trying to wake somebody up who had tried to overdose and kill themselves. So it was kind of scary, but eventually he woke up and kind of like looked around, and at this point they restrained him, and he just looked like straight at me and like looked at me with a complete like gaze on his face and totally confused. And I was just kind of sitting there like not really sure what's gonna happen right now. And so he tried to get up, and obviously he was like restrained, so it was just very physical. So I hit the button to have everybody come in, so people came rushing in, and I was just sitting there and I was like horrified because I didn't know what was going to happen. And he was yelling and screaming, and everyone was trying to reorient him and get him focused together. And so eventually he was calm, and this was after he had been like screaming like, why did you bring me back to life? Like, I wanted to go. Like, just kept like yelling, and the healthcare workers were just trying to like keep him calm. And but he just kept saying like, you tried to save me. Well, I wanted to be killed at this point. So it was just like a lot to hear. So he just kept asking why, and no one really had like an answer. They just wanted him to like calm down. So once the healthcare workers left and he was quiet, I just kind of sat there and I didn't really know what to say to him. I mean, I was just a sitter. I wasn't like a nurse assistant or a nurse at that point, so I was just there to make sure he didn't do anything crazy. So eventually, after a couple of minutes of silence, he started to like hyperventilate and start like whimpering, and I was just like sitting there and I didn't really know what to do. I just like felt horrible. And so it was a little bit like of an emotional roller coaster for sure, because at first, when I first saw him, I was just like completely shocked, and I had never seen somebody like bleed so much like out of their wrist, and knowing that they tried to kill themselves. And I was horrified. I was scared. I was scared that he was going to come at me. I mean, he was tall. He was like a 6'3", 33-year-old full grown man. So I was just a little bit nervous about that. And then after that, I was really sad. I felt bad for him that he felt that he needed to end his life like that. Like I don't know. It was just very emotional for me to try to comprehend that he was so mentally ill, that his mental illness was so powerful to tell him to end his life, and that was the better option for him. So it was just really sad, and I also felt sorry, and I wanted to help him, but there was just it was like the moment he woke up was just not the right time for me to step in and help him. So it was just very chaotic. I was like super emotionally drained. It was really hectic. So it was just a lot of emotions going on, and it was over an overnight shift. So on my drive home, I was just like, what's going on? So it was really crazy, but very emotional for me, very emotional for him. It was a lot, and once he started like whimpering and crying, and he kind of like turned his face away from me to make sure like I couldn't see his face, that he was crying, because I think he just felt awkward that there was like a younger female girl like staring at him. So yeah, it was definitely tough, and in that moment I was like, this guy has been suffering for a long time. So some action that I took to help the patient, it was very traumatic for him. He just woke up and realized he was alive, so I didn't want to like sit there and talk to him, because I feel like the thing he needed the most was just to be with himself. So I just kept silent the whole time, and I kind of tried to not look directly at him. I was just kind of like looking off, so it didn't seem like I was like staring at him like the whole time, so he could have like a minute to like collect himself and like think like what happened and what's going on. So I really felt bad for him, so I tried to kind of pretend like I wasn't there for him, so he could kind of be like alone for a bit. But after doing a little bit of research and evaluating what I could have done better if I could have a chance again, some things that I found was touch, just to show I was like there. And he was restrained, so it was a little difficult. I didn't want to like touch him and not let him kind of say like, or like push me off or anything. And he was also aggressive earlier in the day, so I knew that that was kind of like a risky situation to touch him. But I found that touch is a good way to show that you're physically there. Another thing I could have done was encourage him to talk. And I thought about this on my ride home, actually. I was like, something I could have said was, I know you're going through a super hard time. Like, I'm sure that's something that's really hard to go through. I don't know how you feel exactly, but I'm here if you want to talk, just to know that there's somebody there to listen to him. And then if he did want to open up, just be an active listener. And then another thing that I found through some research was offering spiritual support. So when I was sitting next to him, I saw his patient belongings were obviously not in his reach. But I saw that he had a necklace that had a cross on it. So when I was doing some research, I realized that I could pull in like a spiritual piece and offer him like a religious figure, or if I could like put his cross somewhere that he could see it, just to know that like God's there for him. So I think that's something I could have done better if I could redo it again. One of the 6 themes that I picked was struggling with the ineffable. So this was kind of interesting because this means when you are struggling to speak or talk about something or express your emotion in words. So it's kind of when you start just questioning everything, and I think this related to me because, I was just sitting there staring at him for hours before he woke up, and I was just questioning him, and I was like, how could it get this bad? How could something be so take over your mind so much that it can tell you what to do? I was concerned, I was confused, and I questioned, when he woke up, was he gonna be upset that he tried to kill himself, or was he gonna be sad that he was alive? So there was just a lot of question that was going on. So, and that just led, it just, I could just see him struggling, and that really led to asking unanswerable questions, and I think that's the best theme that relate to my situation. And on the other end, it also is not related to my topic because, we ask all these questions, but through research, I found that, there's lots of different types of ways to prevent it from depression and mental health, getting this bad. So I understand that, I question a lot of things, but at the same time, there's plenty of preventable methods, not just medications, which he was on, because that's what he tried to overdose on. But there's a lot of other strategies that can help with that and other warning signs. And through research, I noticed that there should have been more reassessment and more follow-up appointments that should have been taken place for my patient to make sure that it did not get so bad. So, we question these things how can it get this bad? How can something take over? But in the real scheme of things, it's just healthcare workers not being so proactive. I'm sure there was a number of steps that in warning signs that could have led his healthcare providers to not that kind of outcome. So, an experience that I had as a student nurse where I was suffering was when my grandmother died during nursing school. It really took a toll on my life, and it was really life-changing. It was really stressful, and between that and mix of school and clinical, I was completely overwhelmed, but kind of kept it together until one day at clinical, I had a patient that resembled my grandmother so much that I just remember talking to her, and then I said, "Excuse me for a second," right in the middle of our conversation. I walked out and just started bawling my eyes out, and my clinical instructor noticed that I was crying, so she came over and just hugged me, not knowing what happened yet. So I explained to her oh this woman just reminds me so much of my grandmother, she talks like her and everything. And so how my clinical instructor helped was she used the theme embodying the experience of suffering by relating her situation to mine, and she told me how sometimes that she sees her mother in other patients when she talks to them. So she says that it happens to her all the time, and unfortunately it's a tough thing, but she goes through it the same. So that kind of gave me some incense that, she's here with me, she's gone through the same experience. So that was something that was really touched me and helped me through that time that I was suffering a lot. So for my illustration, I drew this picture of my patient with his depression. So it's basically 2 views. This is the patient's hand, and this is his saturated gauze bandage from him trying to cut himself. And so on the left is what the patient sees when he woke up and he was saved. This is him restrained to the bed and chained back into this deep depressive state of mind that he's been in, and his drugs. That's seems like the only thing that has been helpful for him, and that's the only cure that he thinks he can get. And it's just really dark and gloomy. And then on the other side is what he was hoping for when he woke up, or he wished he could just like go to heaven and fly away from all these depressive, dark times. So this really explains how my patient wants to feel by just like killing himself, and this is how he felt when he woke up and just felt like he was chained into this deep, dark, depressive life. So that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.